6 a.m. sharp. My phone blows up with 911 dispatch. "Sir, you're trespassing on private property. Leave the ranch now." My ranch, the 50-acre sanctuary I bought to save my disabled veteran brother's life. The only place his PTSD nightmares finally fade. The caller? HOA tyrant Stella Worthington, raging that her spoiled son Trevor desperately needs my land for his custody battle. Using her 3 grandkids as pawns, demanding the deed by sunrise. What she didn't know, she's been harassing the county sheriff for months. Her darling boy? Midnight ATV raids, revving at 3 a.m. outside my brother's bedroom, shattering his rare peace. Smashed fences, slashed irrigation lines. When I confronted her about the damage, this entitled witch showed her true face. "Move along, trailer trash, you don't belong here." Every trespass, every insult, every threat, fully documented. Airtight felony case ready to crush their family. The hammer is falling. What would you do if someone weaponized innocent kids to destroy your war hero's sanctuary? My name is Tom Bridgewater, and I've been county sheriff for 22 years. But this story isn't about my badge and uniform. It's about family, sacrifice, and what happens when entitled people push the wrong guy too far. My ranch sits on 50 acres of prime real estate, bordered by Willowbrook Estates, one of those fancy gated communities where the average house costs more than most people make in a decade. I bought this place 5 years ago, not for investment or prestige, but because my younger brother Eddie needed somewhere to heal. Eddie came back from Afghanistan with pieces missing. Not just the leg he lost to an IED, but parts of his soul that desert sand and roadside bombs had stolen. The VA doctors pumped him full of pills and sent him to group therapy sessions in sterile conference rooms. Nothing worked. He was spiraling toward a darkness I'd seen claim too many good soldiers. Then we found this ranch. Something about the wide open spaces, the smell of hay drying in summer heat, the rhythmic sound of cattle moving through tall grass. It brought Eddie back to us. He started sleeping through the night without screaming. His hands stopped shaking when he worked with the horses. For the first time in 3 years, my little brother smiled. That's when Stella Worthington entered our lives like a Category 5 hurricane in designer heels. Stella runs the Willowbrook Estates HOA with the iron fist of someone who's never been told no in her entire privileged existence. She's got that particular brand of middle-aged entitlement that comes from marrying money and spending decades believing her law degree makes her queen of the universe. Her silver BMW never has a speck of dust on it, and she wears those oversized sunglasses that cost more than Eddie's monthly disability check. But it was her son Trevor who really set this whole mess in motion. 32 years old, recently divorced, and fighting for custody of 3 kids he'd barely paid attention to before his ex-wife finally got tired of his anger issues. The family court gave him 60 days to prove he could provide a stable family environment, which in lawyer speak meant he needed to stop living in his mother's pool house and find a real place to raise children. That's when they decided my ranch was exactly what Trevor needed. Never mind that it wasn't for sale. Never mind that Eddie and I had built a life there, that every fence post and barn beam represented hope for my brother's recovery. In Stella's world, people like us were just obstacles to be removed. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early March. I was feeding the horses when I noticed fresh tire tracks cutting through my east pasture. Someone had driven straight through my fence line, leaving a gap wide enough for cattle to wander onto the county road. The tracks led right up to the property boundary with Willowbrook Estates. I figured it was just some teenager joyriding, maybe took a wrong turn and panicked. Fixed the fence, reinforced it with extra posts, and thought that was the end of it. The sweet smell of fresh-cut lumber and the satisfying weight of the post-hole digger in my hands reminded me why I loved this physical work. It was honest, straightforward, nothing like the politics and paperwork that filled my days at the sheriff's department. That weekend, it happened again. This time, they'd cut the fence deliberately, using wire cutters to slice clean through 3 strands of barbed wire. Eddie found the damage during his morning walk, the routine that helped keep his anxiety in check. Watching him stand there, hands trembling as he stared at the destroyed fence, I felt something cold and dangerous settle in my chest. But I'm a cop, trained to gather evidence before making accusations, so I installed motion-activated trail cameras, the kind hunters use to track deer movements. Professional grade, infrared capable, with enough memory to record weeks of activity. If someone was messing with my property, I'd know exactly who, when, and how. The cameras caught everything. Trevor Worthington riding a red Yamaha ATV, cutting through my property at 2:17 a.m. like he owned the place. The infrared footage showed him weaving between my cattle, revving the engine loud enough to spook the horses, then stopping to take cell phone pictures of my barn and equipment shed. Not just passing through, actively surveying like he was planning something. I watched 3 nights of footage that told the same story. This wasn't some confused neighbor taking a shortcut. This was deliberate trespassing by someone who'd clearly been studying my property layout. The 4th night brought escalation. Trevor arrived with a friend, both of them carrying surveying equipment, an optical level, measuring chains, wooden stakes. They spent 2 hours marking boundaries, taking measurements, and driving stakes into my soil like they were planning construction. The arrogance was breathtaking. That's when I made my first tactical error. Instead of confronting them directly, I decided to document everything by the book. 22 years of law enforcement had taught me that solid evidence beats angry accusations every time. So I watched, recorded, and built my case file like I was preparing for court testimony. Wednesday morning at 6:43 a.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. 911 Emergency Services, what's your emergency? Yes, I need police out here immediately. There's a man illegally occupying property on Meadowbrook Drive, and he's threatening my son who was just trying to assess the land for children's housing needs. The dispatcher's voice shifted into professional mode. Ma'am, can you provide your name and the exact nature of the threat? This is Stella Worthington, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. This squatter has been harassing my son Trevor, who desperately needs this land to build a proper home for custody of his 3 children. The man is clearly unstable and refuses to leave property that doesn't belong to him. I had to give Stella credit. She was good at this. Her voice carried just the right mix of maternal concern and legal authority. Someone who didn't know the real story might actually believe her. The responding officer was Deputy Martinez, a solid young cop I'd trained personally. He found me in the barn, repairing tack and enjoying the familiar scent of leather oil and hay dust. Sheriff Bridgewater, got a weird call about someone harassing folks over on your road. I handed him the tablet with the trail camera footage. Martinez watched Trevor's midnight surveys, the surveying equipment, the obvious trespassing. His eyebrows climbed higher with each passing frame. So let me get this straight, Martinez said slowly. The lady calling 911 thinks you're squatting on your own property, while her son is the one actually trespassing? That's about the size of it, Deputy. And judging by their behavior, they have no idea who they're dealing with. Here's something most people don't understand about property law. Trespassing becomes criminal the moment someone enters your land without permission, regardless of their stated intentions. Even if Trevor genuinely believed he had legal rights to survey, which he didn't, conducting nighttime reconnaissance on someone else's property is clear-cut criminal trespass. The surveying equipment actually made it worse, demonstrating premeditation and intent to exercise unauthorized control over the land. Martinez shook his head. Want me to pay them a visit? Not yet. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole goes first. That afternoon brought the first mini twist. Eddie was checking the mail when a silver BMW pulled into our driveway. Stella Worthington emerged wearing a business suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and those signature oversized sunglasses that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." "Excuse me," she called to Eddie, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that makes smart people immediately suspicious. "I'm looking for the property owner. Are you the caretaker?" Eddie, bless him, played it perfectly. "I'll get Tom for you, ma'am." I walked out of the barn still wearing work clothes, faded jeans, flannel shirt, steel-toed boots caked with honest dirt. To Stella, I probably looked exactly like the ignorant hillbilly she'd imagined. "Mr. She waited for me to fill in the blank. "Bridgewater, this is my ranch." "I see." Her tone suggested she saw nothing but an obstacle to be removed. "I'm Stella Worthington from Willowbrook Estates. I think there's been some confusion about property boundaries. My son Trevor needs this land for his children's welfare, and I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. Ma'am, this property isn't for sale at any price." "Everything has a price, Mr. Bridgewater. Perhaps you don't understand the legal complexities involved here." That's when I knew we were in for a real fight. Stella's legal complexities arrived the following Tuesday in the form of official court documents served by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. Family Court of Davidson County, I read aloud, scanning the motion. In the matter of Trevor Worthington versus Thomas Bridgewater, regarding impediment to suitable housing for minor children. Eddie looked up from his coffee, the morning ritual that helped keep his anxiety managed. What's that mean in English? It means Stella's trying to use the family court system to steal our ranch. The motion was a masterpiece of legal manipulation wrapped in child welfare language. According to Stella's filing, Trevor needed my specific property to construct appropriate family housing for his custody arrangement. She claimed my refusal to negotiate was directly harming 3 innocent children by denying them a stable home environment. The really clever part was how she'd framed the geography. Stella had somehow convinced a family court judge that only my particular 50 acres would satisfy the custody requirements. Something about proximity to schools, environmental factors, and therapeutic rural setting that the children allegedly needed. I'd seen enough legal theatrics in my career to recognize masterful manipulation when I read it. Stella was using those 3 kids as human shields, betting that no judge would want to be the one who denied children a proper home. But here's what Stella didn't know. Family court judges deal with parental manipulation every single day. They develop finely tuned radar for detecting when someone is weaponizing children's welfare for personal gain. The court-ordered property evaluation arrived Thursday morning. Janet Morrison, a certified real estate appraiser, spent 3 hours walking every acre while I followed along answering questions. Interesting case, Morrison said as we stood near the eastern fence line. Usually these custody housing requirements are pretty flexible. Mind if I ask what makes this specific property so essential? That's what I'd like to know. Morrison had that professional demeanor that comes from years of navigating property disputes, but I caught her exchanging puzzled glances with her assistant when she thought I wasn't watching. The morning air carried the clean scent of dew-covered grass and that particular stillness that comes just before the world wakes up. Peaceful, honest, nothing like the legal games being played around us. Have you had any interactions with the petitioner or his family? I handed her a tablet loaded with trail camera footage. Morrison watched Trevor's midnight surveys, her professional expression shifting to something between alarm and disbelief. Mr. Bridgewater, this footage shows clear trespassing behavior. Have you filed charges? Not yet. I'm giving them rope to hang themselves with. Here's something most people don't realize about court-ordered property evaluations. The appraiser isn't just looking at market value or building suitability. They're also assessing whether the current situation involves harassment, intimidation, or other factors that might influence their recommendation. Documented evidence of trespassing and property damage creates what lawyers call adverse possession concerns, basically proving that one party is already acting like they own property that legally belongs to someone else. Morrison's report, filed 3 days later, was a thing of beauty. Professional, thorough, and absolutely devastating to Trevor's case. She'd documented not just my property's excellent condition and clear title, but also the concerning pattern of unauthorized access that suggested potential harassment of the current legal owner. That's when Stella made her second major escalation. Saturday morning brought 3 black SUVs rolling down my driveway like a presidential motorcade. Out stepped Stella, Trevor, and what I assumed was their legal team. 4 people in expensive suits carrying briefcases and attitudes. Trevor looked exactly like what central casting would order for entitled rich kid approaching middle age badly. Soft around the middle, designer jeans that had never seen honest work, and that particular brand of nervous aggression that comes from having mommy fight your battles your entire life. Mr. Bridgewater, Stella announced, this is my legal team. We're prepared to make you an offer you can't refuse. The lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Kellerman, stepped forward with documents already prepared. We're offering $2.5 million for immediate sale and 30 days to vacate. $2.5 million. For a property I'd bought for $600,000 just 5 years earlier. Either they were desperate, or they had plans that would make my ranch worth far more than anyone knew. Ma'am, I told you before, this property is not for sale. Trevor finally spoke up, his voice carrying that whiny edge of someone accustomed to getting his way through tantrums. Look, man, I got kids who need a home. You're just being selfish. Son, Your housing situation isn't my responsibility. That's when Stella played her ace card. Mr. Bridgewater, perhaps you don't understand. We have legal options if you continue being unreasonable. Stella's legal options revealed themselves the following Monday when I arrived home from my shift to find Eddie standing in our destroyed east pasture, hands shaking as he stared at the carnage. Someone had driven through my property with heavy equipment, not just an ATV this time, but something with serious weight and cutting power. Fence posts had been snapped at ground level, wire strands cut and tangled, and my main irrigation line severed in 3 places. Water sprayed from broken PVC pipes, turning sections of pasture into muddy swamps that smelled like diesel fuel and destruction. "Tom, they came in broad daylight," Eddie said, his voice carrying that tight control he used when fighting off panic attacks. Big truck with some kind of blade attachment. Driver wore a baseball cap, couldn't see his face. I knelt beside the largest pipe break, running my fingers along the cut edges, clean slices, made with precision tools. This wasn't random vandalism. Someone had deliberately targeted my water system with surgical accuracy. The trail cameras had been disabled too, not destroyed but carefully repositioned to face the ground. Someone familiar with surveillance equipment had neutralized my security without leaving obvious evidence of tampering. "Eddie, go inside and take your medication. I'll handle this." As my brother walked toward the house, I noticed his limp was more pronounced than usual. Stress always made his war injuries worse, and watching someone systematically destroy the place that had given him peace was pushing him toward a breakdown I couldn't allow. That evening brought a knock at my door. Trevor Worthington stood on my porch wearing work boots that had never seen dirt, and a concerned expression that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey man, heard you had some trouble with vandals. Real sorry about that." "Is that right?" "Yeah. My mom sent me over to see if you needed help with repairs. She feels terrible about what happened." The audacity was breathtaking. Trevor was standing there offering to fix damage he'd almost certainly caused, fishing for information about my response while pretending to be a good neighbor. "That's mighty considerate of your mother. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot with this whole property thing, but I'm just trying to do right by my kids, you know? Maybe we could work something out that benefits everybody." Here's what Trevor didn't know. When someone damages critical infrastructure on a working ranch, they're not just vandalizing property, they're potentially creating life-threatening situations for livestock and dangerous environmental conditions. Severing irrigation lines can kill cattle during hot weather, and the combination of standing water and electrical systems creates electrocution hazards. Under Texas agricultural protection statutes, this type of damage qualifies as felony criminal mischief, with enhanced penalties. What kind of arrangement did you have in mind? Well, you obviously can't afford to keep fixing this stuff every time some punks decide to mess with your place. My mom knows people in county government. Maybe we could get you some kind of security patrol, help protect your investment. The mini twist revealed itself in Trevor's casual mention of every time, confirming this wasn't a one-off incident, but part of a planned campaign of harassment designed to make ranch ownership financially unsustainable. "Son, I appreciate the offer, but I can handle my own security." Trevor's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath the fake concern. "Look, man, maybe you don't understand how things work around here. This is a nice area, property values matter, and sometimes change is inevitable whether people like it or not." Is that a threat? Just reality. Ask anyone in the development business. Rural properties this close to quality neighborhoods don't stay rural forever. Market forces, you know? After Trevor left, I called in a favor from the county's best forensic technician. Sarah Rory arrived Wednesday morning with equipment that could detect trace evidence invisible to normal investigation. "Interesting damage pattern," Rory said as she documented the irrigation breaks. "Clean cuts, professional-grade tools, knowledge of pressure points. Whoever did this understood both your system layout and the most expensive places to cause damage." Her analysis confirmed my suspicions. The equipment cuts were made with hydraulic shears, the kind mounted on excavators or utility trucks. The positioning suggested someone had studied our infrastructure layout carefully before attacking the most vulnerable and costly to repair components. "Tom, this wasn't random vandalism. Someone with construction experience planned this specifically to maximize financial impact while staying just below felony damage thresholds." That afternoon brought the week's final escalation. Eddie was working in the barn when he heard vehicle engines approaching. Through the window, he watched 3 pickup trucks circle my property, staying just outside the fence line but making their presence unmistakably clear. The trucks belonged to Worthington Construction, Trevor's uncle's company, according to the magnetic signs on their doors. For 2 hours, they conducted an obvious surveillance operation, taking photographs, making measurements, and demonstrating that the Worthington family had resources and connections beyond what I'd initially estimated. The message was clear: escalate or surrender, because this was just the beginning. Sometimes the most important discoveries come from the most unlikely sources. Thursday evening, my phone rang with an unknown number from Fort Worth. The voice on the other end was female, nervous, and carried the distinctive accent of East Texas. "Is this Tom Bridgewater who owns the ranch on Meadowbrook Drive?" "Yes, ma'am. Who's calling?" "My name is Angela Martinez. I used to be Angela Worthington until 6 months ago. Trevor's my ex-husband." The pieces started clicking into place. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Martinez?" "I saw the news story about Trevor needing land for custody. Mr. Bridgewater, that man is lying to everyone, including the court. I need you to know what you're really dealing with." For the next 30 minutes, Angela painted a picture that turned my understanding of the situation completely upside down. Trevor hadn't lost custody due to housing issues. He'd lost it because of domestic violence charges, financial fraud, and what family court psychologists had classified as narcissistic personality disorder with manipulative behaviors. "The restraining order specifically prohibits him from having overnight visits with our children," Angela explained. "But he's been telling his mother and the court that he just needs proper housing to get them back. It's a complete lie. The custody hearing that supposedly required my ranch? Pure fiction. Trevor's parental rights had been permanently restricted after he'd been arrested for threatening Angela with a baseball bat during an argument over child support payments." "Mrs. Martinez, why are you telling me this?" "Because I've watched Trevor destroy people's lives for years, and his mother always helps him get away with it. Stella has connections throughout the legal system: judges, attorneys, court clerks. She uses her position to manipulate proceedings and cover up Trevor's problems." Angela revealed that this wasn't Trevor's first attempt at property acquisition through legal manipulation. In Colorado, he'd tried to force an elderly rancher off his land using similar tactics: fake emergency calls, harassment, and frivolous lawsuits claiming the property was needed for child welfare purposes. "He doesn't want your ranch for housing, Mr. Bridgewater. Trevor's been talking about developing that land for months. He thinks it's perfect for luxury cabins or maybe a wedding venue, something that would generate serious money." The revelation hit like a physical blow. Trevor wasn't some desperate father trying to provide for his children. He was a predator who used his kids as props in elaborate real estate schemes designed to steal valuable property through legal manipulation and systematic harassment. "Do you have documentation of any of this?" "Court records, police reports, medical records from when he put me in the hospital. Everything. I've been building a case to get his supervised visitation revoked completely." Angela agreed to overnight copies of everything, including psychological evaluations that painted Trevor as a dangerous manipulator with a history of escalating violence when he didn't get his way. Here's what most people don't understand about family court fraud. Using children's welfare as justification for property acquisition is a federal crime under several statutes, including wire fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of legal process. When someone files false court documents claiming child welfare needs to justify taking someone else's property, they're not just committing local harassment, they're engaging in organized fraud that can trigger FBI jurisdiction. As I hung up the phone, everything made perfect sense. The midnight surveillance, the professional-grade vandalism, the expensive legal team, the coordinated harassment campaign, this wasn't some desperate custody situation. This was organized criminal activity designed to steal valuable real estate using the court system as a weapon. Trevor and Stella had picked the wrong target. They'd assumed I was some isolated country guy who'd buckle under pressure from lawyers and lawsuits. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 2 decades building relationships with federal law enforcement agencies, prosecutors' offices, and investigative units specifically designed to handle organized fraud. But I still had one major advantage they didn't know about. They had absolutely no idea I was the county sheriff. As far as they knew, Tom Bridgewater was just some stubborn rancher who refused to be intimidated. Time to let them think they were winning while I prepared something special. Angela's documentation arrived Friday morning via overnight express, and it was even worse than she'd described. Court records from 3 different states showed Trevor's pattern of using fake child welfare claims to target valuable properties. Police reports detailed escalating harassment campaigns. Medical records documented injuries he'd inflicted on Angela during their marriage. But the most damning evidence was a series of text messages between Trevor and his business partner discussing their real plans for my ranch. Luxury glamping site with high-end cabins, event venue for weddings and corporate retreats, and eventually subdivision development once they could get the land rezoned for commercial use. 50 acres that close to Austin could generate millions annually, read one message. Just need to get the hillbilly off the land first. Time to give them exactly what they thought they wanted. My first call was to Bobby Hutchins, the county's best civil engineer, and a guy who owed me several favors from cases where I'd protected his family from stalkers. Bobby specialized in ranch infrastructure and had a particular talent for creative problem solving. Tom, what kind of mischief are we planning? The educational kind, Bobby. Someone's been trespassing on my property using heavy equipment. I want to make sure they understand the consequences of their actions. Bobby arrived Saturday morning with surveying equipment and a grin that told me he understood exactly what kind of education we were providing. Together, we walked the eastern boundary where Trevor conducted his regular ATV reconnaissance missions. See that irrigation ditch? I pointed to the 8-foot-wide channel that carried water from our main well to the livestock tanks. Runs parallel to the fence line, about 6 feet from the property boundary. Perfect natural obstacle, Bobby agreed. What did you have in mind? Here's something most people don't know about rural engineering. Temporary bridges over irrigation ditches are common on working ranches, usually constructed from steel beams or heavy planks that can support livestock, ATVs, and light farm equipment. But these bridges can be designed with specific weight limitations. Strong enough for normal ranch use, but engineered to fail when subjected to loads they weren't designed to handle. Bobby's design was elegant in its simplicity. A collapsible bridge that would easily support my 400-pound ATV or a person on foot, but would collapse under the combined weight of Trevor's 650-pound Yamaha plus his 250-pound bulk. The collapse mechanism used tension cables and breakaway joints that would trigger when the load exceeded safe parameters. Weight limit calculations are based on distributed load factors and dynamic stress analysis, Bobby explained as we positioned the bridge components. Translation: it'll hold what it's supposed to hold and fail when someone exceeds design specifications. The bridge installation took most of Saturday, camouflaged to look like routine ranch maintenance. We positioned it over the narrowest section of the irrigation ditch, right where Trevor's tire tracks showed his regular crossing point. Sunday brought phase 2 of my preparation. I reached out to Angela Martinez and explained what I needed. Official documentation of Trevor's fraud pattern, court records showing his restricted parental rights, and most importantly, her willingness to testify about his real motives for targeting my property. Mr. Bridgewater, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to hold Trevor accountable. I'll testify, provide documents, whatever you need. Phase 3 involved the most delicate preparation of all, gathering witnesses without revealing my true identity or intentions. I contacted 5 neighboring ranchers, all of them fed up with Worthington family harassment, but previously afraid to speak up against someone with legal connections. Tom, we've all been watching this situation develop, said Bill Henderson, whose property bordered mine to the west. That family thinks they can push around anyone without enough money to fight back. What do you need us to do? The final phase required equipment I normally used in my law enforcement role: professional-grade recording devices, evidence collection materials, and communication gear that would document everything in court-admissible quality. I also quietly arranged for Deputy Martinez to be on duty the following Saturday, positioned close enough to respond quickly when needed, but far enough away to avoid spooking Trevor into changing his routine. By Thursday, everything was in position. The bridge sat innocently over the irrigation ditch, looking like it had been there for years. Trail cameras were repositioned to capture multiple angles of the crossing point. Recording equipment was tested and ready. Eddie had noticed the preparations and asked direct questions about my intentions. I explained the situation honestly. Trevor was going to trespass one more time, encounter a completely legal defensive obstacle on my property, and face the consequences of his choices in front of witnesses who could testify about his behavior. Just promise me something, Tom. Don't let this destroy what we've built here. Eddie, what we're doing is protecting what we've built. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, or they never stop pushing. Saturday night was forecast to be clear and warm, Perfect weather for ATV riding. Trevor hadn't missed a weekend reconnaissance mission in 6 weeks. Time to see if he'd maintain his perfect attendance record. Friday afternoon brought Stella's most desperate gambit yet, and it arrived in the form of a personal visit that reeked of expensive perfume and barely controlled panic. I was repairing fence in the south pasture when her silver BMW crunched down my gravel driveway, followed by a black Mercedes that probably cost more than Eddie's annual disability payments. The afternoon sun caught the metallic paint as both vehicles parked with military precision near my front porch. Stella emerged wearing what I'd learned to recognize as her serious negotiation outfit, navy blue business suit, minimal jewelry, and an expression that suggested she'd rather be performing root canal surgery on herself. The Mercedes disgorged 2 passengers, a heavy-set man in an expensive suit who moved like hired muscle, and a sharp-faced woman carrying a briefcase that screamed high-end legal representation. "Mr. Bridgewater," Stella called across the yard, "we need to discuss your situation urgently." I set down my wire stretchers and walked over, still wearing work gloves stained with honest dirt and sweat. The contrast between their corporate armor and my rancher's uniform was probably exactly what Stella had hoped for. Intimidation through obvious wealth disparity. "Afternoon, Mrs. Worthington. What brings you by?" The sharp-faced woman stepped forward with the confident aggression of someone accustomed to winning through paperwork and legal threats. "Mr. Bridgewater, I'm Victoria Walsh, representing the Worthington family interests. We're prepared to make you a final offer." She opened the briefcase with theatrical precision, revealing documents that had clearly been prepared by teams of lawyers billing at premium hourly rates. The top sheet showed numbers that made my rancher persona almost choke on surprise. $3.7 million, Walsh announced. "Cash settlement, 30-day closing, all legal fees paid by our clients. This represents fair market value plus a substantial premium for your inconvenience." $3.7 million. Either they were completely insane, or my 50 acres sat on something worth far more than agricultural land should be valued at. "Ma'am, I've told Mrs. Worthington repeatedly that this property is not for sale." Stella's composure cracked just enough to reveal the desperation underneath her polished exterior. "Mr. Bridgewater, you need to understand the bigger picture here. My son's children are depending on this arrangement. We have legal proceedings in motion that you cannot win." The heavy-set man finally spoke, his voice carrying the flat menace of someone who'd delivered threats professionally for years. "Sometimes people don't realize how expensive it gets to fight City Hall. Legal fees, court costs, property damage from ongoing vandalism. It adds up fast. Here's what they didn't know. Implicit threats made in the presence of witnesses constitute criminal intimidation under Texas law, especially when delivered by parties already engaged in documented harassment campaigns. The casual mention of ongoing vandalism essentially amounted to a confession that they were responsible for my irrigation damage." "Are you threatening me, sir?" "Just explaining economic realities," the man replied. "Smart people recognize when resistance costs more than cooperation." Walsh stepped forward again, clearly trying to regain control of negotiations that were spiraling into overt intimidation. "Mr. Bridgewater, we're offering you generational wealth for property that's costing you money every month. Insurance, taxes, maintenance, ranch ownership is expensive. And if I decline this generous offer," Stella's mask slipped completely, "then you'll discover exactly how expensive it gets to fight people with unlimited resources and excellent legal connections. Family court judges don't like men who put their pride ahead of children's welfare." The mini twist revealed itself in Stella's slip about unlimited resources, confirming that this wasn't just about Trevor's housing needs, but about a much larger financial operation with serious money behind it. "Mrs. Worthington, I think you've mistaken me for someone who can be intimidated by lawyers and veiled threats." "We'll see about that," she snapped, abandoning all pretense of polite negotiation. "Victoria, show him the alternative." Walsh produced a second set of documents, preliminary legal filings that would trigger a cascade of court proceedings, regulatory investigations, and bureaucratic harassment designed to make property ownership financially impossible. "Eminent domain petition for public utility expansion," Walsh explained with obvious satisfaction. "Environmental impact studies requiring expensive soil testing, zoning compliance reviews that could take years to resolve, agricultural exemption challenges that would triple your property tax burden. The scope of their planned legal assault was breathtaking. A coordinated attack using multiple government agencies and court systems to drown me in proceedings that would cost hundreds of thousands to defend against. Of course, all of these proceedings disappear if you accept our reasonable offer, Stella added. Your choice, Mr. Bridgewater, generational wealth or generational debt from fighting battles you cannot win. As their convoy disappeared down my driveway in a cloud of dust and arrogance, I realized they'd just made a critical tactical error. They'd revealed the full scope of their operation while still believing I was just some isolated rancher without resources to fight back. Tomorrow night would be very educational for everyone involved. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes Texas ranchers grateful to be alive. Clear skies, gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and cattle, temperature hovering in that sweet spot between warm sunshine and cool shadow. I was positioned in the barn loft with night vision equipment and recording gear, watching Trevor's regular approach route through infrared cameras. Eddie was safely inside the house with instructions to call Deputy Martinez at the first sign of trouble. At 11:47 p.m., headlights appeared on the county road, moving slowly like someone conducting surveillance before committing to action. The lights stopped at the boundary between county property and my ranch, idling for several minutes while the driver apparently studied the terrain. Then the engine note changed, deeper, more powerful than Trevor's usual ATV. Through night vision, I watched a side-by-side utility vehicle approach my eastern fence line, this one carrying 2 occupants instead of Trevor's normal solo reconnaissance missions. The passenger was Trevor, unmistakably recognizable even in infrared. But the driver was someone new, a larger man wearing work clothes and a baseball cap, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to operating heavy equipment in challenging conditions. They parked 50 yards from my property line and spent 20 minutes conducting what appeared to be a detailed planning session, using flashlights to study hand-drawn maps and pointing toward specific locations on my ranch. "This is it," I heard Trevor's voice carry across the still night air. "Hit the irrigation main first, then the electrical feed to the barn. Make it look like equipment failure, not sabotage." The mini-twist revealed itself when the driver responded, "Your mom's paying me good money for this, but if anyone asks, I was never here. This is the last time, understand? After tonight, find another way to solve your problems." They were escalating from harassment to outright sabotage, bringing in professional help to cause damage that would be difficult to trace back to them. But they'd made the mistake of discussing their plans within range of professional surveillance equipment operated by someone who knew how to gather court-admissible evidence. The driver unloaded serious equipment from the utility vehicle, hydraulic cutters, trenching tools, and what appeared to be electronic devices designed to overload electrical systems. This wasn't amateur vandalism. Someone had planned a systematic attack on my ranch's critical infrastructure. Trevor climbed onto his regular ATV while the driver moved toward my electrical service panel near the barn. They were coordinating a 2-pronged assault designed to cause maximum damage while maintaining plausible deniability about who was responsible. I activated my radio to alert Deputy Martinez. "Unit 7, this is Tom. We've got multiple suspects engaged in criminal activity at my location, requesting backup for apprehension." "Copy that, Sheriff. ETA 5 minutes. Through my night vision scope, I watched Trevor navigate his familiar route toward the irrigation crossing where Bobby's engineered bridge waited patiently for its first real test. The ATV's headlights swept across the landscape as Trevor accelerated toward what he thought was just another night of consequence-free trespassing. The bridge held perfectly as Trevor approached the crossing point, his ATV's weight still within the engineered tolerance limits. But when he hit the gas to power across the irrigation ditch, physics took over with mechanical precision. The combined dynamic load of 650 pounds of ATV plus 250 pounds of rider, multiplied by the forward momentum and downward force of the crossing, exceeded the bridge's designed failure point by exactly the margin Bobby had calculated. The collapse was spectacular. Support cables snapped with sharp metallic pings, breakaway joints separated with satisfying clicks, and Trevor's ATV pitched forward into 8 feet of cold irrigation water with a splash that could be heard 3 counties away. The scream that followed was pure, undiluted outrage mixed with shock, the sound of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions suddenly discovering that physics doesn't care about family connections or legal threats. "Help! Somebody help me! I'm stuck!" The driver near my electrical panel heard the commotion and came running with a flashlight, probably expecting to find Trevor injured from an accident rather than trapped in a carefully engineered consequence for his criminal behavior. "Trevor, what happened?" "The bridge collapsed. My ATV's flooded. I think my leg's pinned." I keyed my radio again. "Unit 7, Suspect 1 is contained in the irrigation ditch. Suspect 2 is approaching from the barn area. Move in for apprehension." Deputy Martinez's response crackled through the night air. "Copy, Sheriff. Units 2 and 4 are backing me up. We've got them surrounded." As flashing red and blue lights began illuminating my property like a patriotic light show, I climbed down from the loft to greet my uninvited guests. 22 years of law enforcement had taught me to savor moments like this, when criminals finally faced consequences for actions they thought would never catch up with them. Time for some introductions that would change everyone's understanding of this situation permanently. The sound of sirens cutting through the quiet night air brought Stella Worthington racing to my property faster than I'd ever seen that silver BMW move. She arrived just as Deputy Martinez was setting up floodlights around the irrigation ditch where Trevor sat waist-deep in muddy water, his expensive ATV completely submerged and his dignity even more thoroughly soaked. But Stella wasn't alone. Following her BMW came a convoy of vehicles that turned my rural ranch into something resembling a media circus. Black Mercedes carrying the Worthington family's legal team, white news van from Channel 7 after someone had apparently called in a breaking story about rural property harassment, and 3 additional patrol cars responding to Deputy Martinez's backup request. Perfect timing, because I wanted plenty of witnesses for what came next. Trevor was still thrashing around in the ditch, alternating between screaming for help and cursing about his rights being violated, when Stella emerged from her BMW wearing a white terry cloth robe over silk pajamas. Even in crisis mode, she'd managed to look like she was heading to a luxury spa rather than bailing her criminal son out of trouble. "Officer!" she called to Deputy Martinez, her voice carrying that imperious tone she'd perfected through decades of getting her way through legal intimidation. "I demand you arrest the man responsible for this booby trap. My son was conducting legitimate property assessment when he was injured by this criminal's negligence." Martinez looked up from photographing the collapsed bridge, his expression professionally neutral. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back while we process this crime scene." "Crime scene?" Stella's voice climbed an octave. "The only crime here is this squatter attacking my son with illegal traps. I'm Stella Worthington, president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA, and I demand immediate action." That's when the Channel 7 news crew started rolling, their camera lights turning the nighttime chaos into primetime drama. Reporter Jessica Rory positioned herself with the perfect backdrop, flashing police lights, Trevor still stuck in the ditch, and Stella gesticulating wildly in her designer pajamas. This is Jessica Rory reporting from Davidson County, where a property dispute has escalated into what appears to be criminal activity involving harassment, trespassing, and systematic vandalism. I walked out of the barn wearing full Sheriff's Department uniform. Badge, radio, duty belt, everything that identified me as the law enforcement officer I'd always been, but had never revealed to the Worthington family. The effect was immediate and devastating. Stella stopped mid-sentence, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, gasping for air as the reality of her situation crashed down around her. For 3 months, she'd been threatening, harassing, and attempting to intimidate the county sheriff, while her son had been conducting criminal trespassing operations against a law enforcement officer's property. "Mrs. Worthington," I said in my official capacity, loud enough for the news cameras to capture every word. "I'm Sheriff Tom Bridgewater. Your son is under arrest for criminal trespass, destruction of property, and conspiracy to commit vandalism. You're being charged as an accessory for organizing and financing these criminal activities." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Trevor splashing in the irrigation ditch and the mechanical whir of news cameras capturing his mother's complete mental breakdown in high definition. You're the sheriff?" Stella's voice had shrunk to barely a whisper. "Yes, ma'am. Have been for 22 years. Every false 911 call you made, every harassment campaign you organized, every threat your legal team delivered, all of it was directed at a county law enforcement officer. That elevates these charges to felony level under Texas harassment statutes." Deputy Martinez was already reading Trevor his rights as additional officers helped extract him from the ditch, his expensive clothes now resembling something dredged from a swamp. The hydraulic cutting tools and electrical sabotage equipment provided clear evidence of premeditated criminal activity. But the real knockout punch came when Jessica Rory thrust her microphone towards Stella for comment. "Mrs. Worthington, how do you respond to allegations that your family has been conducting a systematic harassment campaign against a county sheriff?" Stella looked directly into the camera, her carefully constructed public image collapsing in real time. We thought he was just, we had no idea. Are you saying your family has been filing false police reports and threatening property destruction without bothering to identify the property owner? Angela Martinez chose that moment to arrive, carrying a briefcase full of documentation that would destroy any remaining sympathy for Trevor's child welfare narrative. The news cameras captured her emotional testimony about Trevor's real history, the domestic violence, the custody restrictions, the pattern of using fake emergencies to steal valuable property. Trevor Worthington has no legal right to custody of our children, Angela declared. This entire harassment campaign was designed to steal valuable land for commercial development, using innocent children as props for real estate fraud. As Trevor was loaded into a patrol car and Stella faced questions she couldn't answer, I finally understood why this moment felt so satisfying. For once, people who thought money and connections made them immune to consequences were learning that some things, like justice, can't be bought. The legal aftermath unfolded with the methodical precision of a well-designed dominoes display. Trevor faced 18 separate charges ranging from criminal trespass to conspiracy to commit property damage. His hired saboteur, a construction foreman named Danny Walsh, who'd been feeding his gambling addiction with Worthington money, received immunity in exchange for testimony about the organized nature of their harassment campaign. Stella's legal troubles proved even more complex. Her law license faced suspension proceedings for filing fraudulent court documents, while federal investigators opened cases for wire fraud and conspiracy charges related to the fake child welfare claims. The State Bar Association was particularly interested in how she'd used her position as an HOA president to coordinate harassment against a law enforcement officer. But the sweetest justice came through financial consequences that hit the Worthington family where it hurt most: their wallets. My civil lawsuit generated a settlement that covered $18,000 in property damages, $50,000 in punitive damages for harassment, and an additional $75,000 in legal fees and emotional distress compensation for Eddie's PTSD treatment. The total came to $143,000, paid directly from Stella's personal accounts after Trevor's assets were seized to cover his criminal restitution. More satisfying than money was watching the Worthington family's social destruction play out in public. The Channel 7 news story went viral, generating over 2 million views on YouTube and spawning dozens of copycat stories about HOA abuse and entitled behavior. Stella became the poster child for everything people hate about petty authority figures who think rules don't apply to them. The Willowbrook Estates HOA board voted unanimously to remove Stella from all positions, elected new leadership committed to actual community service rather than personal power trips, and issued a formal apology to our family for the harassment we'd endured. Trevor disappeared from the area entirely after serving 90 days in county jail, reportedly moving to Florida where his criminal record would be less well known. Angela Martinez successfully petitioned for permanent termination of his parental rights, finally giving their 3 children the security they'd never had while Trevor could manipulate the system. But the real resolution came in smaller, more personal victories that money couldn't measure. Eddie's recovery accelerated dramatically once the harassment ended. Without the constant stress of defending our sanctuary, he was able to focus on healing work that had been interrupted by months of anxiety and sleepless nights. The ranch became peaceful again, filled with the sounds of cattle moving through grass and horses snorting contentedly in morning pastures. 6 months later, Eddie approached me with an idea that transformed our property into something even more meaningful than we'd imagined. Using his military contacts and my law enforcement connections, we established the Bridgewater Ranch Veterans Recovery Program, a nonprofit organization providing rural therapy environments for combat veterans struggling with PTSD and related trauma disorders. The program operates on 50 acres of Texas hill country, where the biggest sounds are cattle lowing and wind moving through oak trees, where men and women who've seen too much violence can remember what peace feels like. We've helped 37 veterans in our first year with waiting lists that extend months into the future. The irrigation ditch where Trevor met his consequences became something of a legend among local law enforcement officers, who occasionally drive by to see the spot where entitled privilege finally faced engineering reality. We rebuilt the bridge properly this time, strong enough to support anything that has legitimate business crossing our property. Angela Martinez brings her children to visit occasionally, and it's remarkable watching kids who spent years walking on eggshells around their father finally experience what normal family stability looks like. They love feeding horses and collecting eggs from our chickens, simple country pleasures that remind everyone involved why this land was worth defending. Every evening, Eddie and I sit on the front porch watching sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, drinking coffee from mugs that taste like satisfaction, and listening to sounds that money can't buy: peace, security, and the knowledge that sometimes good people win when they refuse to give up.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.